Man from Tin Can Alley. In a small American town, a few thousand people dwelt with the full capacity of their capabilities. The town had an old brick hospital that, in function with healing the current citizens, it also welcomed many of the town's new citizens and saw the departure of nearly all the citizens as well. The streets had daily scatterings of traffic. There were many houses made of wood and brick. The town was laid out in a square grid. A few shops lined downtown on Main Street and led to the governmental buildings. The shops were nearly a century old and occupied spaces where former shops, banks, barber shops, pet stores, bars, and restaurants had been. Over the decades, the new proprietors would paint their names over the name of the previous proprietor at the front of the shop, and so on. Governmental buildings were some of the tallest in town. They were placed in the center and made of new brick and marble. The post office, police station, and fire station were all around 10 to 15 years old and made of brick and marble. The governmental buildings etched their respective names into the hard brick their offices and stations were made of. The courthouse was the oldest building in town. The post office was the newest after a fire burnt down the old post office, in which no foul play was expected. The courthouse took up an entire city block and stood on the only hill in town. In fact, the entire geography of the town sloped up toward the yard of green grass. The front of the great building had large glass doors that appeared dark and foreboding. To reach the doors, there was a stairway carved into the hill with 30 long, flat steps. The courthouse was made of the largest bricks ever carried into town. It was square and had a large dome, and there were tall white pillars around its perimeter. 8 years ago, the courthouse received an immaculate statue. The statue was placed atop the dome. It could be seen from far away, but when one walked up to the glass doors of the courthouse, one lost sight of the statue. Its arms held something too high for anyone to read except the dozen or so illiterate speckled pigeons that rested daily on her arms and crown. Throughout the town, the streets were paved with many layers of black tar, and the alleys were composed of gravel. The gray cement sidewalks had long been in a dilapidated state and went unused on principle of vanity. So hardly anyone in town walked. The adults parked their cars as close as they could to whatever building they were going into. The children, for their part, rode bicycles through the low-trafficked streets and the alleys of gravel. Most everyone traveled on a pocket of air and rubber. The adults listened to the radio while driving in a bubble. Their children were outside listening to the streets. The adults glided peacefully, traveling at high speeds, looking down on the world they were passing through. The children looked up at the sky from their bicycles and traveled at much slower speeds. 10 years ago, it was successfully championed by the city council to disallow children the use of the alleyways. The newspaper praised the idea and pushed a campaign that summer for the bill. The children did not read the newspaper, and no adults from the town impeded the bill's motion. It happened to be favorable amongst nearly all the men in the most prestigious orders of the town, who used their influence to get the newspaper to advocate residents to put chains across their alleys to block the children's bicycles. Many of the well-meaning citizens began to chain the alleys before it was voted as a law. The alleys were blocked off by a single stretch of linked chain attached to two posts a few feet off the ground. If a motorist had to use the alley, the car had to stop. Then the man or woman would get out of the car and remove the chain from one post and drop the chain to the ground to pass over. If a married couple was driving and the man was the driver, then he had to put the car in park, get out, unhook the chain, get back in the car, drive over the chain, then hook up the chain again. But if his wife was driving, she could drive over the chain, and the man could wait outside for her to drive past, and then hook the chain again to the post, so the alley was secured. And still to this day, women drive more than men. The children were smart enough to ride around the chains for most of the summer. But in late August, the law passed and it went into effect that the alleys were only for the use of motorized vehicles. Signs were posted and the newspaper suggested that parents make sure their kids know it is now illegal to ride through the alleys and that they must only ride their bikes exclusively on the sidewalks. In the following months, mothers saw an increase in skinned knees and elbows. Some concerned mothers went to a town meeting and brought up the state of the sidewalks. Their concern was thwarted by the chief seat of the city council, who said, "Children get into accidents because they are riding too violently on the streets and they don't wear the proper safety protection." It was decided that the school would hand out free bicycle protection and commit an afternoon to safety awareness for the children. This decision by the council was celebrated in the local paper as an example of the kind-hearted people we have running our town. The children continued to break the law in the following weeks, so all the citizens were called by the newspaper to run out and sternly warn any children endangering themselves. The children continued to disobey, and some prestigious men took it upon themselves to physically stop the children riding near their property and seize the kids' bikes. This caused an uproar, resulting in many verbal altercations between the fathers of bike riders with the men from the most prestigious orders in the town. One local mail carrier, the father of an excellent bike rider, even spent a night in jail for taking his daughter's bike back from the banker who took it from his daughter. The mail carrier was freed the next morning in time to deliver the mail, but couldn't take his daughter's bike home because it was evidence in the assault charge filed on the mail carrier by the banker who took his daughter's bike. But soon the winter months came, and the children stayed near home, for bikes were no longer adequate for getting around. The roads were salted and the adults still drove their cars, but the children were either ice skating or on sleds. The law remained a success and tempers cooled until the next spring, when a child was riding down near Main Street and lost her balance and veered off into the moderately traveled road. The child fell and was crying in the street, but the first car stopped and helped her. Many other cars stopped, and a crowd formed around the girl until an ambulance arrived. She was thankfully not seriously injured, save a scraped elbow. But the incidents caused great alarm, and the mothers and fathers went to the next town meeting and demanded that the chain law be disbanded and that children may ride through the alleys. When the council tried to say they were in the process of appropriating funds to fix the sidewalks through the passage of a higher tax on all licenses, one woman stopped the meeting by pounding her shoe on a desk. Once it was silent, she firmly said, "You're either going to do something about this tonight, or we will." This received cheers from all the people. The council was shocked stupid and could not order the hall for a half hour due to the cheers. The chief seat of the council declared that the law was to be disbanded immediately and all chains may be removed tomorrow. The newspaper couldn't help printing the headline, "Theatrics at City Hall, Chain Law Disbanded by Ladies' Shoe." So the ban on alleys changed 9 years ago, and the children were again allowed to ride free. They talked, laughed, and screamed through each alley. Sometimes the children would gain as much speed as possible and then skid to a complete stop before the next intersection. The children had contests to make the longest mark. It was practiced so often that children made relatively equidistant marks as other children in the same grade, and the length of their marks generally increased with age. But once in a while, a third-grade prodigy could make skid marks as well as the sixth graders. All the children had imprinted in their minds a map of the streets of the town by which they knew every shortcut and scenic location. They had names for the alleys, mainly due to what was in the backyards of the residents. More than a handful were named after the different dogs. Big Dog Alley, 3 Dog Alley, Mean Dog Alley, Fat Dog Alley, and 10 Dog Alley were known to all the children, and some minor names were being devised and accepted in various groups, such as Clothesline Alley and Low Tree Alley. One of the alleys was named for the backyard of one resident in particular. In this yard there was a broad white house with an open back porch. The house was white and had one floor and one obtuse gable. Above the porch was a roof of rippled tin slanting downward, showing its rust spots. The rippled tin was upheld by 5 wooden pillars that were perhaps 4 feet apart and 7 feet high. The house was pale. The overhanging rippled tin roof was placed at the divide of the 2 floors perpendicular from the gable, forming a short triangle at the top, with one small circular window in the middle and a short rectangle at the bottom, with 2 windows on each side of the central door. The wooden floorboards of the porch were 1 foot off the ground, and upon the wooden floorboards sat an incalculable number of aluminum cans. The children called the alley Tin Can Alley, in spite of the fact that the cans were made of aluminum. For all their lives, these children rode their bikes through town and saw the scatterings of cans littered by the adults. The children concluded this house must hold the person who picks up all the cans, because the cans seem to cover the city one day and vanish like dust the next. One child remarked, "I thought the wind took all the cans away." And until the discovery of this backyard, the wind theory had been widely believed. Every day after its discovery, the children rode by Tin Can Alley in auspicious wonder and never saw the occupant who had amassed such a fortune of tin cans. But it came to pass that a small group of children were riding through Tin Can Alley and finally did see the man on his back porch walking into his house. They slammed to a stop, but only caught a glimpse of the man's back as he stepped in the door. Immediately these children rode around all day telling other children they had just seen the man